Just wait for this thing to get started. And see if I can see your comments as well. So far, nobody watching. According to this, I don't know if that's true. 3 watching, excellent. Hello guys. Could you do me a massive favour? Could you comment, please? And then I'll know if comments are working. And also, just let me know. Oops, I just need to put this on silent so it doesn't vibrate. Sorry about that, guys. There we go, that's better. Oh, you can hear me. Oh yes, comments are working, fantastic. You can hear me all right, please. Hi, and let me know that you can see me clearly as well, because for a brief moment it went off there, did the internet. Hiya, Colin, Jocelyn, Kate, Richard, hello. Hiya, Jeff, happy birthday for the other day. Whew, got my veil, it's warm. Can see me and hear me. Thank you very much. Hopefully the signal won't go off. I've got a new Wi-Fi thing going on in the house, so if it does go off, just come straight back. I'll move closer to the router. We've got a few watching tonight. Oh, goody, we've got a few morbid lot. That's fantastic. Right. Oh, so welcome and hello. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Mackenzie, in case you've never seen me before, and I run the Shadows of York tour in York, obviously, but unfortunately we're not running at the moment. There is quite a lot of videos that I've done in the past which are available to watch of ghost walks and various other things, so I've decided to do something different and talk about other things. And tonight I'm going to talk about Victorian funerals and mourning. It's a very morbid subject, you might be thinking, but it's actually really interesting, and I love the Victorians. Funny enough, this is a talk that I was going to be doing, or something similar, when I used to work at the Casa Museum, but sadly I'm no longer there. This isn't going to stay on my head. And, yeah, as I say, unfortunately I wasn't able to stay, so because of the pandemic. So I've put something together for you tonight instead. Now, this is all what I've researched and what's been available to me. Now, you probably think you know everything about the Victorians and the funerals and the mourning, but I'm hoping I'll teach you something you don't know. And of course, do feel free to ask me any questions. I probably won't see them all on the screen. If I don't worry, I will definitely come back to you afterwards, okay? And if there's anybody who can't watch the whole thing all the way through, then don't worry, the video will be available afterwards as well. So hello to everyone. Right, I am going to put this down because it's absolutely really warm with this thing on. I don't know how they coped in the Victorian period, I don't. So, anyway, I'm going to start off by saying why. Why did they have these things? Why was there so much death in those times, or seemingly so much more death? Well, it isn't a case of it's a new thing. People unfortunately do die all the time. However, for us in our lifetimes, some of us will experience death more than others, unfortunately with family and friends and people that you know. But back in not just the Victorian period, but basically all throughout history, death was a lot more common. Unfortunately, for example, ladies, childbirth was quite dangerous. 1 in 150 ladies would die from childbirth. Your children didn't always survive, and you'd have lots of children, but unfortunately many children didn't make it past the age of 5 or 6. And of course in those days we didn't have health and safety. We had a lot more diseases that we didn't have cures for. You could get killed by walking out into the middle of the street by a passing horse and carriage. Of course there was the railways. Now the railways were fantastic, but they were very dangerous to work on. In the mines, you could die in the mines, you could die in the factories. They were horrible as well to work in, very dangerous working conditions. So there was lots of extra reasons and things that you'd probably die from. So the Victorians had a lot to deal with death. And we'll say the fashion of it really became prominent when Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, died. Now, obviously, Queen Victoria, as you know, she became quite stocky. She was really saddened and grieved for the rest of her life. She mourned for the rest of her life for Prince Albert, and she wore black for the rest of her life. And now because of this, she set a trend. However, the Victorians didn't wear black for the rest of their lives, and it's a bit of a misconcept that all Victorians wore black. You might look at some old photographs, and yes, a lot of them look predominantly black, but guess what? When you look at any old black and white photograph, everything looks dark. The Victorians were quite colourful, depending on their social status and what they could afford, of course. But the mourning period obviously brought about these strange traditions. I say strange, they weren't strange to them, but they're strange to us. And obviously brought about a fashion of wearing black and mourning for their loved ones. And I'm really sorry, I do have my notes here because I don't know everything off by heart. Where is it? Oh, okay, yeah, right. So, to follow the fashion of death, death was a really big thing, particularly in middle class and upper class, and you would buy magazines to help you learn how to mourn properly, what was socially acceptable. And you'd buy a magazine that was probably called The Queen, and that was a very popular magazine back then. I'm not 100% sure if it's still available now, but it's called The Queen. And so, ladies, you would literally buy these magazines and read what was hot, what was not, what you should wear, what was socially acceptable, what was not acceptable. And to be honest with you, for your children, you used to buy them dolls so that you could teach them how to mourn as well, because children would be subject to death and things like that as well. So you were taught how to mourn properly throughout growing up. But so let's get on to the nitty-gritty. Somebody's died in your house, right? So when that moment, that sad moment actually happens, then some of the first things, as traditionally you're going to do, is you are going to close the curtains like that. Oh, hello. Say hello to Arthur. Don't want to frighten you. He's right there behind me. A doll. A troll doll. Hi, Arthur. Yeah, so you close the curtains. You will turn pictures around or face them down. You would cover up mirrors and you would stop the clocks. Now, the point of this is that they used to believe that if you don't do these things, then the spirit of the person who has died will be trapped inside the house, in the reflection of the mirror, the windows, or the photographs. If you don't turn the photographs down, then you or your loved ones could be soon to follow. And the clock was to stop, was to be stopped so that they could then move on. Those were the traditions. And then when they take the corpse away from the building, obviously in the coffin, or however they want to take them out, then they had to leave feet first out the door. Because if they leave head first, they used to believe that the dead could look back at the house and beckon a loved one to follow. So you have to take them head out. Sorry, I was just reading a comment there. Take them feet out first, otherwise they will beckon the loved ones in. So that was one of the weird and wonderful little traditions that they would do as soon as somebody died inside the house. Now, when somebody has passed away, obviously you notify all the friends and family, relatives, etc. And you need to get straight on with organising the funeral. And the body is then going to come back home. And usually we're going to display the body, the corpse of the loved one, in a nice coffin, probably put it in what we call the best room of the house. So that would be your front room, your living room, whatever you class as your best room in the house, so that you could have something called a wake. Now, I don't know about across the pond or anything, but sometimes here in Britain we get things a bit mixtured up now. We'll go to the funeral and then we'll say, we're going to go to the wake, meaning the celebration afterwards at the pub, usually at the pub anyway, and have a spread. But the wake isn't something that happens after. The point of a wake is that you are going to sit around your loved one, you're going to stare at your loved one and mourn their loss, but you're going to make sure that they don't awake. 9 times out of 10 they're definitely dead, but occasionally something might happen like coma. Now, coma wasn't something we were that familiar with. So the person might be lying in their coffin, but they're not necessarily dead. So they have to make sure that they're not going to awake. but you're also going to keep them in the front room of the house so that you can have something that you probably already know about, a post-mortem photograph. Now, I did write this down, bear with me a second. I'm not always very good at pronouncing things. Oh, yes, that's it. It was called a memento mori, I think. Yes, memento mori. And the point of that is, the traditional saying is, it means, remember, you must die. So you have a memento mori, sorry. And what you're going to do is you're going to hire a photographer. And here's the interesting part. Sometimes you couldn't afford to have photographs taken. So the only time that you would ever have a photograph that you'd saved up for was when somebody had died. So you're going to have that to remember them by. And to us, this is really morbid. But for them, that was nice. It was a nice way to remember their loved ones. And I'd have wanted a picture of them alive, but okay. It was a nice way to remember their loved ones and to help them mourn. Now, you may have seen lots of photographs, I will post a few after this talk, of people looking like they are asleep, or they look like that they're alive and well. However, they're obviously not alive and well, but what they used to do was either, in very extreme cases, pin open their eyes, or they would paint colours on their eyes, or after the photograph had been developed, they would then paint pupils on their eyes to make them appear awake. Sometimes, if there were babies or small children, then the family members would also be in the photograph and they'd sit holding the child, making it look like they were just asleep. Or sometimes, in some cases, they used to literally prop them up and make them look like they were standing. So there's a lot of weird and wonderful memento moris out there. There's even one of Queen Victoria herself. Now, when Queen Victoria died, she had a photograph of Prince Albert above her bed, a memento mori of him asleep. She had that above her bed, and then in her photograph, her death photograph, she's got the picture of, obviously, her and Prince Albert behind her in the background. So again, if I find that picture, I'll share it and show it to you. So that was one thing that you would have, but also you would have jewellery. Now, this went on with what you used to wear. But sometimes today we actually have locks of our hair cut off and we might put it in a little box. In those days, they used to put them in lockets, have them round the neck. Or they used to make bracelets out of them. I don't know about other museums, but I do know that in the Castle Museum where I used to work, there was a little jeweller's store in the Victorian street. And there is some genuine Bedouin bracelets that have been made out of someone's hair. So you could get the hair of your loved ones and make a bracelet that you would wear as a memento mori as well. So you've been walking around going, oh, my bracelet, nice, do you like it? It's made out of my husband. So, all these weird and wonderful things. Let me just make sure I've not missed anything here. Okay, so the funeral. Believe it or not, the funeral was very expensive. Even for the poor, it could be very expensive. And you wanted a very decent send-off. Now, once again, this came down to social status, snobbery and fashion. And funeral directors really cashed in on this. They used to obviously come up to the family home and say, oh, very sorry for the loss of your loved one. What would you like? The starting price is this. This is what you can have, but you could have this. Now, you could have things like silk-lined mattresses to go inside the coffin, as well as the silk-lined coffin itself. You could have the pillows. You can have umpteen flowers, and depending on what sort of coffin you wanted it to be made out of, you could go really overboard and it could be quite extortionate. But not just the coffin. You would have the funeral director sit with you and say, right, so you want a nice carriage, or do you want something a bit more bog standard? But bear in mind, and this is how they used to get round them, bear in mind, them across the road, they had a really nice horse-drawn carriage and they had 2 horses, or if they had 2 horses, then what they're going to try and do is encourage you to have 4 horses. So you in your social status and trying to be upper class and outdo the Joneses, you would completely say, oh yes, well we want to look better than them, so we'll have 4 horses. Then you might have more carriages, even though you might not have very many family members going. You want to have as many carriages as possible, so it's part of this parade. You want umpteen mourners, pallbearers, etc. So a funeral could become very, very expensive. Even ridiculous things like having ostrich feathers on the carriages. So again, you can look at old photographs and even old video footage from that era, and the funerals were very, very extravagant and expensive do. And they were so expensive, funerals actually cost more than your own wedding. And you were more focused on your funeral than you were your wedding, because the chances of death were very, very high. For the paupers, obviously they can't afford all that extravagance, so if they don't want to have a total pauper's funeral with no stone, no nothing, what they used to do was starve themselves and their children sometimes, just so they could save up for just in case and ready and waiting for the future when somebody had died. Consequently though, sometimes somebody died because they were starving themselves just so that they could have enough money for the funeral. So it was a bit bizarre. Anyway, we're going to go on to what was hot and what was not with what you wore. Now this one's quite in-depth and confusing, so I'm going to start off with this. First of all, children. Children, if your family member died, so your mum or your dad, you would mourn for 1 year, usually about 1 year. Children could wear either black or all white. So children could actually wear all white, and that is why you see a lot of photographs where children are all in white, but the adults are all in black. And you might get those ghost stories where there is a strange lady standing next to a coffin, but she's all dressed in black and the children are dressed in white, and if they're from the Victorian era, that would explain why. But so the children would mourn for a year, or even if you was an adult and you're mourning your mum and dad, they've passed away, you mourn for a year. If you lost your child, you would mourn for a year. If you lose a grandparent or an auntie and uncle, then it was about 6 months, 3 to 6 months. And as you went down the spectrum, basically, the length of time for mourning got less and less. This is the real horrible bit, though, for the ladies. Girls, if your husband dies, you will mourn for 2.5 years. Now, somewhere online you'll get 3 years, and it is technically a 3-year mourning period, but it's actually officially 2 years, 6 months. You had 3 stages of mourning. So your first stage was that you would be completely dressed in black, and it was very bland colours. They used something called crepe, which was like a ruffled material. It was very bland, there was no shiny bits attached, nothing like that. And you would have a veil. So, oh, hang on, let's fight with this, shall we, for a moment. So you would have a veil to hide yourself away from society, so that nobody sees your face and you are in deep mourning. Oh dear. You might also have some jewellery, of course, your memento mori, your jewellery, the hair, bracelets and things, your lockets, but a lot of your jewellery also had to be very dull. It couldn't be diamonds and pearls. It would be gold or Whitby jet. So Whitby jet was very popular back then. And then you came into your second year, and in your second year you could start adding things like greys and a little less crepe, the odd silks and satins, just to give it a little bit more shine. Now the point of this is so that if you were seen out at all, then society would know whereabouts you were in your mourning. Then you came into your third year, your last 6 months, when you could start adding lilacs and things like that, and probably wear a little bit more extravagant things, but it was still dark colours. And then finally, by the end of it, whee, you're done. The other thing I'm going to tell you is that during the first year of mourning, ladies, you were not allowed to socialise. Now this seems very familiar right now because we're all in lockdown, aren't we? We're not allowed to meet anybody or socialise. But back then, girls, you had to withdraw yourself from society and you couldn't go to outings, you could not see anybody, you couldn't really take visitors as such. And that was for a minimum of 6 months, but it was more socially acceptable for a year. The only time that you could be seen otherwise was to work, if you really had to work, or you take on the business of your husband or something like that. Otherwise, you withdrew from society. If you were seen, then it was classed as being socially inappropriate and very disrespectful, and you would be snubbed. So you made sure that you withdrew and you basically sat in your home, mourning the loss of your husband. And to give yourself a bit of entertainment, what you could do is make yourself a wreath. And it was like a type of family tree. So we think of wreaths as being these nice things that you put out at Christmas. And I should have mentioned, actually, I forgot to say, we'd also used to put a wreath on the door when somebody had died to let people know that somebody's died in this house. But your wreath was put inside the family home, and the wreath was made out of hair. So during when people were alive, or when they died, you get a bit of the hair, and you can sit there making this wreath, and you would add to it and add bits of flowers and bits and pieces to make it look nice. Not bright, but yeah, you could sit at home during that year and make a wreath, add it to the collection, and then you put it on display for all the family to see, and you say, oh yes, that's your grandma's hair, that's Harold and George when they died last year, that's your dad, and that's your second dad. And it went on and on and on. Ridiculous. But it was normal back then. Now, here's the other thing, girls. You were not allowed to marry. It was not socially acceptable for you to marry until at least 6 months. But usually a year was preferred. Or not until the end of your mourning period, so 2.5 years. The only reason why you should marry before that is if you were going to become destitute and you had children to look after, they needed a father, or you had a business to run but you didn't know how to do it. So that was the only reason why you would be socially accepted and allowed to marry. And on your wedding day, you could wear white, though usually you just wore a white veil and you were still in black. But then you went straight back into mourning the day after. You were not allowed to wear any other colour. You still had to continue with your mourning dress. Now, if your second husband died before your mourning period was up, you had to start all over again. So you had to withdraw from society once again, and it became quite a long slog. And also worse than that is, if you got your magazines and you was reading The Queen, it was very common to be seen wearing the same outfits. So you had to go out and get yourself a whole new outfit. You couldn't be seen wearing that old thing again. How disrespectful, how rude. But unfortunately, because of this, you could become destitute just because you were spending all this money on clothes. A cheaper method was to send your old dresses to a seamstress, and she could just add bits to it or take bits away and make it look a little bit different if you were struggling financially. But otherwise, yes, you had to pop off and get yourself a whole new dress. Now here's the bit that's really unfair. Double standards. Gentlemen, your daily outfit more or less was black. It was black for working as a doctor, dentist, down in the pit, whatever. Well, probably not in the pit, but you come out covered in soot. So he was always wearing black. So your dress wasn't all that much different, and it was acceptable for you to wear a black hat or a black cap. black armband, waistcoat, trousers, gloves. That were it. Not a lot of difference. And gentlemen, if your wife died, you were socially accepted to stop mourning after 3 months. 6 months was better, but 3 months was socially acceptable. There is lots of differences that you'll find online, but this is what I was researching at the Castle Museum, so that's what I found out. You will find lots of differences and things, but I also got it from this book, which is about the Victorian undertakers. So that tells you a bit about the length and periods of Victorian mourning. It might be different for America as well, because the Victorian Americans and the Victorians in Europe might have had their own ideas. So the length of mournings might be different because of the differences in places. But otherwise, gents, 3 months, 6 months was better. But actually, it wouldn't be unusual for a husband to remarry sooner. So basically, as soon as she's dead and buried in the ground, you could remarry. It would be scandalous, but you could remarry. But it wasn't really socially acceptable until 3 months. And yeah, you could stop mourning, get out of the black garb after 3 months to 6 months. So it really, really was double standards, wasn't it? Not fair. And also, unlike the ladies who had to withdraw from society, men could continue to go out to the bar, to the men's clubs, play poker and all that sort of thing, see their friends. They could continue life as normal and go to work as normal. I believe that children, but I can't tell you how long for, were taken out of school for a time. But I unfortunately couldn't find out how long that was for. But during the mourning period, children would not go to school. Again, not socially acceptable for them to go to school for a certain period of time. So that's that. Very double standards indeed. Here's something that's also a bit morbid I forgot to mention. Because death was so prominent, and I said earlier that you planned for your funerals really well in advance. I know we do that sort of thing today, but back then you really did, because chance of death was quite high, particularly for a lady. Now, ladies, on your wedding day, as part of your regalia and your wedding dress, you could have your shroud as part of your wedding dress. So you know that nice white veil that comes down the front? That could be what you'd wear at your funeral, just to save some money. And also, ladies, as soon as you fell with child, you made a will, because it was literally 1 in 150 women who would die from childbirth. So quite a morbid thing when you think about it, but they had to prepare. That's the way it was. And another common cause of death, by the way, was overcrowding, particularly in cities. And that was a big thing in the city of York and in the city of London. We had a lot of people that were literally racked and stacked in houses, and not just workhouses, I mean housing in general. So obviously overcrowding, it's bad air. Back in those days, all the factories, there was so much smog around, so your lungs were clogged up and disease would then take hold. And yeah, that was another reason why we'd have an awful lot of death as well. Sorry. Oh, I wrote this one down. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you this one. Another reason why a lot of children died and didn't make it to the age of 5. I found this one out the other day. Quite interesting. Horrible. Babies and infants. Obviously today we feed a bottle, right? Well, they did use bottles back then, but it was like a glass bottle, but it also had a really long tube and the teat at the end, okay? And this is so the baby could literally just feed itself, you know. There you go. Look after yourself. And unfortunately, yes, you could clean the bottle. The glass was fine. The teat might have been fine. But that tube was very difficult to clean. And so all the bad bacteria that was inside that would go into your child as they were drinking the milk or the juice. So that was another reason why there was such a high mortality rate in children, young children. I thought that was quite horrible and yet fascinating at the same time. So mothers, I can already Here you're running off to get your baby's bottles and make sure they're definitely clean. Don't panic, it's different today. Oh, hang on. Post-mortem funerals, expensive, destitute, yes. Mourning dress, parents, 1 year, men, wives. Aha! Oh yes! Day of the funeral. You go to the funeral, you bury them, and go home, and it's all done and dusted. However, are they going to stay in that grave? Because back then, resurrectionists, yes, body snatchers, grave diggers, now they were a big thing at one point. And the reason, mainly, wasn't just because they might have been buried with some really nice jewels and stuff, but medicine really was improving vastly in the Victorian period. We created things like the local anaesthetic. Anaesthetic is something we use today, and it was created back in the Victorian period. So doctors really wanted to get into the medical science, but unfortunately, when people died, they didn't donate their bodies because they wanted to make sure that they went to heaven in full form. So they didn't believe in getting themselves cut open unless absolutely necessary, as in to do a post-mortem for murder and stuff. So they want to go into the coffin full and whole with all the bodily functions and everything inside, organs, etc. So basically, science had to wait until somebody had been executed, and we have a lot of stories and things about this at the Castle Museum, because the Castle Museum is where the prison was, and obviously we executed people there. So when somebody had been executed, we used to send their bodies off to a science lab to be dissected, and then 24 hours later, sent back, buried in a pit, or in the graveyard, or wherever. So doctors used to, on the sly, pay somebody to go off to a graveyard knowing that somebody has died recently because they need a fresh body, and pay for them to bring the body back to do their practices on. Now it sounds awful, but I suppose in a very horrific way we do have to thank medical science for doing that. Otherwise we might not know some of the things we know today. But it isn't nice, it's a horrible thing. Sorry, I'm just going to scroll up, my comments are disappearing there. So you wanted to make sure that people, when they were buried, they stayed buried. But this again was down to whether you could afford it. So sometimes you may walk around graveyards and you'll be looking at some gravestones and you'll see that they've got what looks like concrete slabs or stones on top of them. And yes, sometimes we literally had to bury them, put rocks on top or slabs or something just to stop the grave diggers from being able to move them and steal the bodies. Other things you may notice that are really weird and wonderful and wacky is there's cages on top of some graves. Now again, the joke is so that the dead couldn't escape like vampires and all that, but that was just a story, just a myth. It made for good storytelling like vampires and stuff, but the reality was it was to stop grave diggers from being able to get into the graves or make it very difficult, because by then, whilst they're trying to get in there, somebody might have spotted them, usually somebody doing what's called the graveyard shift. So people people did have to spend the night in the graveyard doing the graveyard shift in search of grave robbers, but they also were there for another reason. Now, the biggest fear at some point in the Victorian period, largely because of stories by Edgar Allan Poe, were the fears of being buried alive. Now, there is lots of stories out there about how people weren't always dead, and they were dying in their coffins after they awoke, and there's scratches on the lids and sides of coffins where they've sadly awoken from their apparent death. And yes, sometimes you might have had 1 or 2 accidental deaths, but it wasn't common. Those were just stories. But because of the stories, the Victorians were terrified. So once again, the Victorian undertaker cashed in on their fears. And they would create something called a safety coffin. And the most common one was that they would bury you into the ground, and through the ground they'd filter a pole into the ground, into the coffin. Through that pole, they'd then filter a rope or a chain into the coffin. It was usually, they'd try and make an attempt to tie it around the ring of the person, or they'd put it in the hand or something. Very technical. And then, if you should awake, then you would pull on this string or this rope or this chain. And on the outside world, that rope was attached to a bell. And it would ring. So the grave robber, the person on the graveyard shift in search of grave robbers would also sit by the grave to make sure that bell did not ring. If it rang, then they had to dig you up and let you free. And it is widely debated all over the world, but it's believed that the terms dead ringer or saved by the bell may have come from these stories and these myths. There's lots of explanations as to why those sayings are there, but that is what we do think. So, yeah. Excuse me. I'm just going to quickly check. Do you still have grave leases in England? Asking from the US. Do you know what? I think you do, but I'm not 100% sure. That's something I'm going to have to look into. Excellent question, that. You've caught me. I don't know. Possibly. About 100 years is about right. I don't know if it's still legal now, but it was. I think more people get cremated more and more every day these days. But anyway, yeah. So that was the point of a bell being attached to the coffin. Some other versions were that they had mirrors on the inside, and apparently people could come up with a pole and have a little look inside the coffin with a torch just to see if anybody was stirring inside the coffin. Though of course there wouldn't be anybody stirring in there. And yeah, that was the point of that. And you will, like I say, hear lots of stories about that, particularly from Edgar Allan Poe. There is a story about that in York that I do like to tell on tour, but you'll have to come on tour to see that. The other interesting thing that was, I'm not going to say was created, a lot of people say it was created, it wasn't. Spiritualism, rituals, belief in ghosts and things like that has been forever, okay? But one of the big things that did take off in the 1840s and 1850s and onwards was mediums. So mediumship, seances, contacting the dead. Now, people died all the time, a lot more regular in your family, and you probably wanted advice. You wanted to know how they were, if they were okay, where's the keys in the house, anything, absolutely anything. And unfortunately, there might have been some well-meaning ones, or maybe some genuine ones out there, but there was a lot of fakes, which were exposed in those times as well. I've got written down here, called the Fox Sisters, Kate and somebody. Hang on, I can't find it now. That's marvellous, isn't it? Death photos, it's there. I can't find it. Daniel Douglas Hugh was a famous one, but he was never exposed as being a fraud. However, he did retire because he was on the verge of being exposed as being a fraud. I'm just going to call them the Fox Sisters. Oh no, it's there. Kate and Margaret Fox. Now, what they famously did is you want to contact your dead relatives, so you would ask a medium specialist, a spiritualist, to come to your home, or you would probably go to their home. And they will probably ask you to leave the room. And this was all one big con, because what they used to do was hide behind the curtains and have somebody create knocks, or even dress up all in white and wear a white veil and pretend to be your deceased loved one. It was as ridiculous as that, and sadly we believed it. But what would happen during a seance is they would invite the family back into the room. They would ask you all to sit there holding hands with each other, so that they knew that you weren't moving about, and that was the con, if you will. Meanwhile, the medium would be talking to the deceased relative. They would pretend to be possessed. They would use knocking. The Fox Sisters were famous for doing knocks. The joke is knock once for yes, twice for no. But the reality was, if somebody knocked once, then they were there. If there was no knocks, then there was nobody there, obviously. They would have horns and little sticks as well. So the other trick was whilst you're holding hands and you were in nigh on pitch black, barring a candle maybe, then the medium might just shake the hand. But in shaking the hand, just for a moment going, oh, twitch. But what they've managed to do is trick the other person into grabbing the other person's hand, so that their hands are now free and they can do things like touch their shoulders. So there's lots of crafty ways that they used to try and convince people that they were being visited by their dead loved ones. And some of the famous authors who wrote about this and actually got involved in mediumship because they had a great interest in it was Charles Dickens and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And obviously Queen Victoria herself was very big into it because she wanted to contact her husband, Prince Albert. So some very famous people have been involved in the medium and spiritualist side as well, just to contact the dead to see if it was true, if it was real. And it went on and on and on. And again, you can look up lots of really old videos of people pretending to do a seance and show you the tricks on how they used to do it. And they are original old Victorian movies. And I do have one other thing to tell you about that. Oh yes, the obvious one, I don't know how I forgot this. So because of all the seances and things like that being a big thing in the Victorian period, and we actually started to have this big thing where we believed that it was real, that we could contact the dead, along with stories like Edgar Allan Poe, then Victorian ghost stories became a thing. So we have lots of ghost stories, and everybody always asks the question, why is there so many ghost stories about Victorians? Well, this is because the Victorians basically were the creators of ghost stories. Everybody started writing about them. There is literally hundreds of books out there from the Victorian period when they were enthralled by telling ghost stories, particularly on Christmas Eve. That was the best time to tell a creepy ghost story. Me personally, actually I lie, yes I do like a good old ghost story on Christmas Eve, but otherwise I like Christmas to be nice and Christmassy, and you know, about Father Christmas coming down the chimney and leaving presents. But yeah, tradition was to tell a really creepy ghost story, so you probably didn't sleep, and then next day, lovely day. Now that I've told you all of that, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions about the things I have just told you, and I'll do my best to answer. I'm sorry it's not the longest talk in the world. You love M.R. James. Yeah, I do. The thing with the Victorian mourning period, actually, it kind of ceased when Edward came along, because Victoria actually made her children dress in black for a very long time, and the kids obviously got sick of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, they loved their father, they missed him, but they thought it was a bit extreme, and Victoria really was extreme. So when Edward came into power, he became the king. He did away with an awful lot of the traditions and things, and then by the time we got to, sadly, the First World War, because there was so much death, this mourning periods and everything else, I won't say completely ceased because we still have funerals, but the traditions and stuff completely went by then, completely. Not everybody followed them all the way leading up to it, but it was completely done. You know, the belief system had basically gone. It was a different time after the First World War. Again, you can probably read into that. Yeah, so let's have a look at the questions. When there was a Sandman who came to pull you out. Oh, Italian stories, excellent. Mum telling me Santa coming down the chimney was scary enough for me as a child. Well, you're probably right. I wonder if they ever got caught out and a real ghost came forward. You know what, Deborah? You're probably right. Old pennies were placed on their eyes to keep them closed. The old pennies was to pay the ferryman as well. I don't know if that was more Victorian though. I think it might have been a fair old bit before. But yeah, putting coins on the eyes was to pay the ferryman so that they got to the underworld safely. That I'm aware of, anyway. I'm just scrolling through all your comments here. Mother's family graves had members buried on top of each other and saw her mother's. Yes, you're absolutely right there. Oh God, I've scrolled you off before I saw your name. I'm sorry. So here's an interesting thing. When you go to a graveyard, not necessarily just in York, I mean anywhere, you will see that some old graveyards you can walk past and the ground is up here and you're thinking, how's that? I'm walking on the ground down here. Why is the ground all up there? Well, in the old days, until basically cholera came along, sadly a disease that at the time they weren't sure how it spread, and so they started burying people deeper. But we only used to bury people about 2 or 3 foot deep. We didn't bury them 6 and 7 foot plus deep before. The only time they would dig you deeper was so that, yes, you could share one plot. So they used to literally rack and stack bodies, one on top of the other, and then plough more mud on top. So you've got some graveyard that's quite high up. Just think, you're nearly at eye level with some dead person there, but they're just underneath the ground a little bit. I have a question. Was Burke and Hare story... Yeah, Burke and Hare was a real... was definitely a story, but a real thing. Excuse me. That came in the earlier Victorian period, as far as I'm aware. That was something I was taught by one of the curators at the museum. That wasn't something... that they weren't in the later period when this became more... I won't say more common, but they were more famous for it and probably started the idea of it for medical science. Victorians were really into the flowers and their meanings. Yes! Now, do you know what? Like a Wally, I didn't get all of the meanings. I know that rose meant love, but they used to have lots of different flowers. Again, that was a social thing. You had to have every single flower that meant and represented something to do with death and mourning. So flowers were a very costly thing in funerals as well. Love your talk, you look scary but nice. Oh, thank you, Patrick. I'm meant to be scary. On my toes. Death masks, now then, I just saw that. Sharon Fay. Death masks, now believe it or not throughout the Victorian period, but for a good, probably the earlier part, before we started with the photographs, only if you could afford it, you could have a death mask made in memory of your loved ones. Thank you for bringing that up. I had forgotten about the death mask. So yes, death masks were an actual thing as well. Occasionally you might find some in museums if they've survived. Oh, and there was something else. Now, for whatever reason, I don't remember writing this down. In memory of your family member, usually a child, you will not find any in existence that I'm aware of. Possible replicas, but not real ones. And I think it's probably because they've been damaged or melted. If you could afford it, you could have basically a doll. You know a doll? A child's doll made out of wax, and it would look exactly, as best as possible, like your deceased child. And you would have that in your home to look at as a memento mori. You could pop it on the side and think of it as being there, or put it in its cradle and think, oh, there it is asleep. And yeah, that's really morbid, really, really creepy. So if you've got any pop dolls at home, just think about that one, that it might be representing somebody. But yeah, you could, if you could really afford it, you could get a creepy doll. Now, again, there is actually a photograph online of one that may be a replica. It looks really creepy. I won't say realistic, but definitely really creepy, of a doll. And it'll explain the point of that and why they had these dolls made. Yep. Beck, the dolls were also used, as I said it at the beginning actually, the dolls were used to train children about mourning periods and things like that. Were lilies connected to funerals, is that true? I'd like to say yes, but I'm not 100% sure. Just going through your things. Now, I'm sorry, sometimes not all comments come through until afterwards, if that makes sense, so I will come back to everybody. There's a show called Dead Still that is set in the 1880s, based on postmodern photography. Oh yes, there is. Yes, I saw that advertised. I can't remember if it's on Netflix or Amazon, but there is a show. I don't know if it's a film or if it's an actual series, but I saw that last year, and I will watch it one day. I just haven't got round to it. Sorry, I'm covering up here. Can we verify the tall, slender man is a myth? I'm not dreaming it. The tall, slender man? I don't want to say if it's a myth or not, Jonathan, because I don't know. I've not researched it all that much. So at the moment, he's real until I disprove it. We all know how much I like to go in for truth and separate fact from fiction. But on this occasion, he's real. Sorry. When I was a child, we used to wake up in a house because I died. White reef on the floor. This would have been 1971. I don't think the people do this anymore. White roses, I think, are meant to be associated with death. Yes, and sometimes they used to put them on the doorsteps to say that somebody had died. People don't really do it anymore, but yeah, that was another representation to say someone has died at this house or in relation to this house. Creepy, yeah, they are. Right, I'm just going to scroll through again, see if there's any questions that I may have missed. I'm going to scroll right through. Thank you, Victor. Not a time to show what happened to Margaret Clitheroe except her hand was cut off and preserved. Louise, yes, so the story of... Oops, beg your pardon, 1 second. The story of Margaret Clitheroe in York is... She wasn't from the Victorian period, she was from 1500s. And I can't remember the exact date, sorry. Basically, she was executed for being Catholic and harbouring Catholic priests inside her house. It wasn't illegal to be Catholic as such, but you had to go to the Church of England. So that's a bit pointless. But yeah, she was mainly being executed because she was hiding Catholic priests. And she was crushed until death, and they did that by putting a door on top of her, adding weights to her, and yeah, she got squished. We don't know what happened to the body. Nobody knows what happened to the body, but as a relic to her, some Catholic sympathisers cut off her hand, and the hand is on display at the Bar Convent in York, which is now a hotel. And it's also a museum, really worth a visit. It's all about the persecution of the Catholics in the city, so do go and pay a visit to that museum. It's near Micklegate Bar, which also has a museum called Henry VII. So if you're visiting York, go to those museums. I'm just scrolling through. Any other questions, guys? Oh! We have that at hospitals. What do you have at hospitals? Sorry, Julie? No, put red and white flowers together. They represent blood and bandages. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I've learned something. Could you send a link to the secrets of the Victorian seances you mentioned? Oh, yes, Selena, don't worry. I'll be posting everything after this talk. I've got quite a big list of stuff. I say a big list. Some bits and pieces to show you all afterwards. I just wanted to do it after the talk so that you had something to put an image to the explanation. There is a few documentaries actually out there that are really long-winded compared to what I've told you, so if you're really interested you can watch them as well. Open the window when someone has died to let the soul out. Yes, you're absolutely right, Michael, that was another thing, and sometimes they still do that today. In fact, that's an interesting one. I think this is more pagan, but on New Year's Eve, as we hit midnight and go into New Year's, you have to open the back door of the house, and I think maybe the front door as well, to let all the old out, all the bad, the negativity, the spirits, and let in the new. So that is still a tradition done today by pagans. Janice Parker, isn't there an area near York railway station where plague victims were buried? No, it's not plague, it's cholera. It's right in front. I say right in front. It's to the left as you come out of the railway station of York. On the left-hand side there is the Cholera graveyard. Now, they were buried there because the priests didn't really want to put them in consecrated ground in the church because there were so many to bury. They weren't sure where the disease was coming from. Didn't want it to come from the corpses. And so they consecrated some ground on the outside of the city, on the outside of the walls, and buried them deeper, and in some cases they buried them in lead coffins to stop the disease from leaving. But then in York we have somebody who is called Dr. John Snow, not Jon Snow from Game of Thrones obviously, but he was a doctor, and I think he went down to London, and it was him that discovered how cholera was being spread, and it was being spread through the water because in those days sewage water and drinking water were kind of mixed. Ugh. So from then on in the Victorian period, we created separate sewers and separate water pipes and stuff like that. So we finally separated the drinking water from the sewage, basically. Thinking rich because we buried the rich under churches. Yes. Another thing in the Victorian period, if you really, really could afford it, you could have your own family vault and put your families in the walls of the vault, but you had to be super, super rich for that. Did they have wakes? Yes, Cheryl, I've covered wakes. We definitely had wakes, but it was before the funeral, not after. If you mean celebrations, I don't think that they really did, because you had to just go off into mourning pretty much instantly. Sorry, just scrolling through. Do you know there is a nun's graveyard in the grounds of All Saints School? I do, Rachel. When I went to... So Bar Convent is now a museum, but Bar Convent is a school, a hotel, a cafe and museum. But they own pretty much all those buildings all around, and I went on a tour there last year when we was allowed to go, and it was really quiet and really safe. In fact, I was the only one in the building with one friend. And there was a lovely nun who took us round, and she said, yes, all this grounds is ours. This is our... They have their own retirement home, and yeah, they have their own little church and section where they bury the dead if they wish to be buried there. So yes. Anastasia Edwards. I have talked about the death photography. If you, at the end of this video, if you go back to the beginning, you'll be able to see that bit there. Thank you for the talks. Thank you, guys. Oh, what is the red and white rotating strips on the barber's shops? They have mine. Yes. So when you, I mean, today it's just for decoration, but when you walk around and you look at old shops, or a better example would be when you watch an old movie and you've got the barbers, but the barbers has a pole sticking out of the sign, if you will, and they've got like red and white stripes going all the way down them, but they can have different colours to represent what they did. So they could be a barber's, but they could do, like say, minor surgery like dentistry. They weren't dentists, but they could pull your tooth out, or they could do bloodletting. Now in those days, and right up until, well, I'll say nearly, or maybe World War One, we believed that bloodletting was healthy and good for you, and if you were sick, then bloodletting was the way to cure you. It made it so much worse, obviously, but back then we believed that bloodletting was good for you and got rid of the bad blood, particularly if you was poorly. But that's what those stripes represented. You could have different things done to you. What happened if you really couldn't afford a funeral? Oliver Danes. So if you were destitute, you were poor, you would basically have a pauper's funeral that was paid for, I'll say, by the state. So basically it would be the most bog standard box, or maybe just a shroud. Dump you in the hole, you have no headstone, nothing to say that you were there. And I can't remember whereabouts in the graveyard, if you were even put in the graveyard, or someplace else, but you literally had the most basic pauper's funeral, which was shameful for you, the person mourning, and for the person who died. So you did your best to save up for a funeral for the future. This is why I'm saying that funerals were a big thing back then. Nobody wanted to just be dumped in a hole and forgotten about. They wanted to be remembered. So, excuse me, this was why you made sure you had your money, even if you were poor, for a funeral. Now, for some reason, it won't let me scroll past there. Any Victorian mourning traditions in Midgley? They were all the same, I think. Are the mediums of today well? For some reason, it's not letting me scrolling past here. What's going on? The mediums of today. I think, personally, today's mediums... Oh, that's why, because there's loads. I'm just going to scroll all the way back to the beginning, because there's loads here. Mediums of today, my personal opinion is that there is very, very few who probably can talk to the dead. They can do it. I personally think that I'm quite sensitive. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can contact your nan. I can't. I am sensitive. If I think there's something here, and I will try and listen, but I can only go with what I think I hear or what I think my imagination says. But when I do that, I always want to have confirmation, and I want people to be brutally honest. And so far, amazingly, I've always been right about buildings that I've never been to and stuff. So I'm going to definitely say that I'm quite talented. But again, I am not going to start doing readings and tell you that your loved one is okay, because I've no idea and I'm really sorry. That's my personal belief, and that's what I think I can do. And I do think there is people who can really maybe talk to the dead, but I think that it takes years to maybe teach themselves to do that. I don't think it's actually something that you are born specifically. You're not special. I think we can all do it. It just depending on whether you believe in it and whether you want to go down that route. But I do think there's an awful lot of people out there who have basically studied psychology, because a lot of people read you. They read your body language, they read your voice on the phone, and most people that go to a reading, it's going to be a cold reading, but you will go because you want to know if you're going to find love or how's your deceased loved one. Those are the two top reasons that you go to a medium. Other things, if it's just for a bit of fun, then they'll just give you oh yes, you'll meet X, Y, Z, and that's when you go to Blackpool and you got the lady with the palms, and she'll say, oh, you're going to have this, that and the other done. And you'll just go, oh, okay then, just for fun. But when you really want a real reading, I do find that it's very difficult for a medium, because we have power over our future. We can dictate what happens. Nothing is set in stone. That's my belief. So when you are told about something happening, it's an option. It's a little bit like when you go for a job. You're not necessarily going to get it. It depends on how well you work in your interview. So that's my belief. So I'm not going to downplay all mediums, but I would say be very careful and don't buy into it too much. If you feel that personally that they're not right for you, then don't use them. That's my advice anyway. I've had very few readings that have been correct. One of the best ones I ever had was a recent one. I don't mind telling you this. Last year I unfortunately lost somebody very close to me, and I was quite broken-hearted. And there was a lovely lady called Pamela who I spoke with, and she says, I don't want you to tell me anything at all. I'm going to do the reading for you, and I'm going to tell you something, and if you resonate with it, then that's fine, but don't tell me. I don't want to know if it means anything to you until afterwards, because I don't want you to think that I'm going on a certain role with something, if you will, and cheating. But one of the things that she did do, because there's an awful lot of things that are very cliche, they'll say, oh, you've had a hard life. Well, let's be fair, who hasn't? And they'll go on and on and on like that. And that's exactly how mediums used to work in the Victorian period, funny enough. But she did say to me, okay, here's some evidence for you. Is it suddenly cold? And I said to her, yeah, my legs feel a bit drafty suddenly. She said, good, they are with you. And they say that you have 2 cats and they are sat with you. My 2 cats were sat with me on the bed. And I was like, oh! She says, yeah, well, they are with you and they are keeping an eye on you. And I was very happy with that because this woman did not know that I had 2 cats. She certainly didn't know that they were sat with me, and they were. So that was the best reading I'd ever had. But we'll come off mediums now. Is there any other questions about Victorians that you want to know? Oh, here's another one. In the Victorian period, when you died, they used to want to get the post-mortem photographs done and dusted within 48 hours because you would start to decompose about 2 or 3 days after you died. So it all had to be done very, very quickly. But also, you would literally be in the wake, in the front room for just literally 2 or 3 days, and hopefully you would be buried. However, if there was a problem like a queue, or you couldn't quite afford the funeral yet, then your loved one would have to stay decomposing in the front room. So that's quite a horrible fact for you as well. Let's have a look. Arthur. Oh yeah, you looked up Arthur, yeah, that's what I've called him, Arthur. He doesn't say much. Yeah, that was a mark of respect. Whenever you see a passing funeral car, you bow your head in respect. In the old days, they used to take off the hat as a mark of respect. And also, another interesting thing, when there was a funeral procession going through a city, you couldn't then go past them. You had to wait until they'd all gone by, or you probably, I suppose you could turn around and go back the other way, but that would be pointless. So you had to wait until all of this procession had gone past you. Otherwise, that was classed as being disrespectful and maybe a bad omen. So they say. Sorry, just scrolling through your bits and pieces here. Do I believe the dead can contact you in dreams? I think so. I think it's rare, but I do think so. I need to visit York and go on a tour. Love it. Oh! You do, love. I'm doing my tours. I should tell you, actually. I am starting my tours again at the end of May. I might do them slightly earlier than that in May, but I'm just waiting and seeing because everything could change with lockdowns. But I have got tickets available from the last week of May going up until the end of August. Later on, I will put more dates in for September and, of course, Halloween. And I will continue to do some online videos as well, but I anticipate and hope I'm going to be quite busy. Okay, does anybody else have any more questions regarding Victorians? Did I cover jewellery made with a deceased person's hair? Yes, I did. I did. Lorraine, is it Lorraine or somebody? Whoever asked that? I'm sorry, I'm not very good with these comment things. Yeah, I've covered that, yeah, so just go back to the beginning of the video at the end. Is it pre-booked tours only? Louise, on the website, you go onto tickets and the tickets will come up and they run most Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, usually around 6:30 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. But I also do private tours throughout the rest of the week. So if anybody wants just a private tour, the minimum is 2 people. You know, so a couple. I do take a lot of couples round actually, and they love it. More personal experience. It's £35 for 2 people, and prices go up or alter as you get more people in the group, which is quite cheap compared to a lot. Some charge £50 per person, so there. So my private tours aren't too expensive by comparison. But yeah, I am doing private tours as well, but again, they won't start until probably about May time. Just because I've got to be careful with the laws, regulations, and obviously I want to keep myself and everybody safe. Because the person that I lost last year was to COVID, and it is not a nice disease. No matter how many people say it's a hoax, I can assure you it's not. Thank you for the great talk. You're welcome, guys. It's a pleasure. I really hope you do enjoy them. I know it wasn't as informative as my previous talks, but there is only so much you can talk about this mourning period without going into so much nitty-gritty detail that everybody goes to sleep. Am I an independent tour guide? Yes, I am. It's my own business. It's in its 6th year now, and it's just won an award. Woohoo! Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks to you. Yeah, the castle was just a place I used to work at. I worked as a gallery guide in different sections of the museum, not just in the Victorian street. In fact, to be honest with you, I only did a handful of shifts on the Victorian street. I used to work in the oh god, what was it called? Shaping of the body section was where I was put mainly, and then World War One, which is really depressing. And it's only depressing because it's the things that it talks about, and also the cells. The prison cells are my favourite bit in the museum. So yeah, when it opens, please go. In fact, when all the museums open, please go. When the theatres open, please go, because I am a actress and have been an actress. I do want to get back into the acting scene. Speaking of which, I've just done an audio audition. I'm hoping I get it. But we'll see. But yes, I'm an independent tour guide. Thank you, Andrew. Good to see you again. What was that about a walker? Let's have a look. Same question again, except I have to use a walker. Diane, right, so the tour is accessible on foot and wheelchair friendly and pushchair friendly, same thing. Anything with wheels, it is accessible, so don't worry, the tour is accessible. Even with the cobbled streets, there is a smooth bit that I can take us on. Alright, so if you are struggling on your feet, don't panic, there is ways and means on the tour. Alright. If you do struggle to walk and you can only walk really slow though, I would probably recommend a private tour. Then I can take you at your leisure and not rush you or anything like that. Alright. I don't recommend it for young children though. It's a really dark and macabre chat on the tour. Does it include a visit to the pubs? No, it does not. I'm afraid it is a ghost walk and not a pub crawl. And the reason for this, actually, there's 3 reasons. I'll try and remember them all. But the first one is that pubs in York are tiny. Absolutely tiny. And on a Friday and Saturday night, if you think you're getting in there for a drink, you can think again. Secondly, trying to get some drunks around on a tour is impossible. And I'm not saying you're a drunk. I'm just saying that eventually when you've had a few, you've gotten really merry. It's impossible. And to try and talk to you in the pubs that are really busy and not get heckled by XYZ in the pub and touched up and all the nasty stuff that happens, again, impossible. And finally, a lot of people don't like groups going into the pubs in York because the places are so small. And that's why I don't do the pub crawl. Oh, actually, there's a 4th reason. The 4th one is that I tend to take you on the outskirts as well, away from the busy areas, because there is so much to tell you that is different to other guides as well. Excuse me. So, yeah, unfortunately I don't go into the pubs. You could have a private tour, but I would recommend it being for a very, very, very small group, and I would have to tell you which pubs that you could potentially go to that are large, but then you wouldn't be going to any traditional pubs because they're all tiny. So I'm sorry about that. There is some tours out there that do a specific pub ghost or historical chat. In fact, my friend Mad Alice does a gin tour, but she's actually got a few links with some pubs that she's able to go into a private room with, but those aren't available yet, I don't think. But do pop along to her website later on in the year and see if she's doing what's called the gin tour of York. You don't have to drink gin, but she does do that. Okay. Where can we find your previous videos? Right, Sharon, pop onto the page, go on to videos, and they're all there. All of them are there. Really easy, all free. Speaking of which, I should mention, I always forget, if you do want to donate for this video or any of the previous ones, then please do. Obviously be careful, watch out for scammers. Now, thankfully, I've been really crafty. I've managed to block lots of words and phrases, so there might be some comments that I'll have to unhide on here just to get your questions, because I've made it absolutely as foolproof as possible to stop scammers from commenting and conning you out of your money, because all these videos are free. The donations are just pay what you feel. So if you think I deserve a quid, then please give me a quid. If you think I deserve more, then by all means, thank you so much. And the only reason I ask is just because whilst tour guides are off like everybody else in the world, unfortunately, we, the tourism industry, have been at the bottom of the pile, along with all the other self-employed, for getting any furlough, for getting any grants, and this, that and the other, largely because we don't have business rates, but we do have other bills to pay, and unfortunately we've been entitled to absolutely nothing. So we've all been doing these videos, Dorian Deathly, Mad Alice, a few others, theatres, they've all been having to do certain stuff to try and get donations. So if you do want to donate, please do. The link that is safe to click is attached to this video. And this is the bit that we all laugh at, me trying to remember what it's called. So, it is paypal.me/Shadows of York. I remembered it. You'd think, oh God, that made me jump, it's him. I'm frightening myself now. I've got this little fella sat here as well, he's nice, isn't he? Yeah, that is the link, and you'd never think that I was an actor, would you? And I can't remember my own link, but yeah. Any other questions, guys, before I leave you? Sharon Spink, yeah, we have been dumped on from a great height, yeah. Tourism and actors, we've all been forgotten about, haven't we? Now, do you know what? I was going to give you a big apology at the beginning of this talk, but thankfully they seem to have behaved themselves. Now, some of you might not know, I have 2 cats whom have been asleep all day. And they literally woke up a minute before I went live, and I thought, aye, they're going to be naughty. And they interfered with my last video, didn't you, Sebastian? He sat here looking at me. So I came prepared this time. Cat biscuits. You want these, don't you? You can have them in a minute, sweetie. So, would you like to see a pussycat? Would you like to say hello to your audience that's going to give you some donations so I can keep buying you this very expensive food because you're fussy and have an upset tummy on a regular basis? Here you go, 1 kitty cat for you. I've got you piled up on a load of books and I don't want to drop it. Here we go. This is Sebastian. Hang on, there he is. Hello Sebastian, your silhouette is there. And this little fella who's walked off behind me now is Merlin. Hello Sebastian. Yes, I'll give you your biscuits in a minute. No, he meowed at certain points in my last talk, so I had to run off and feed him and then come back to the talk, so I came prepared this time. But you've been good, haven't you? And I've had a change of scenery. I've moved you all into the kitchen. So I've got all the candles, bits and pieces, with nothing naughty in the background. Yes, we've all seen the news, haven't we? Yes, yes. Cats are evil, sorry Sebastian. Ah, some of them are. These 2 can be. Merlin, don't climb on top of there, please. Thank you. I'll feed you in a minute. Right, guys. If anybody has not had their questions answered or haven't commented on the video but you want to know something specific, just drop me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And if not, then I hope you've enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've learned a little bit. And, oh, Merlin. You naughty boy. He's playing with this. Playing with Mum's present that I've got for Mother's Day. This is Merlin. There you go, Merlin. You've got your audience. Sorry, it was after attention. Yeah, so yeah, I hope you've enjoyed yourselves tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I will do some more talks. I've not got any events planned at the moment because I'm basically out of ideas, but I'm thinking maybe there's lots of things that have turned up on YouTube and stuff that are real documentaries, so I'm going to share quite a lot of stuff to you over the next coming weeks that I hope you'll enjoy. And I will think of something new to talk about. Otherwise, I may just do another ghost walk around York. Even if you've seen it before, it might just be a nice refreshing journey again. Maybe hopefully see something different, or maybe spot a ghost. But otherwise, do feel free to look at my other videos. There's quite a lot of them out there from last year, focusing on different things, with different stories, different subjects. Something for everyone, I hope. Alright, but otherwise, enjoy yourselves, stay safe, and I hope to see you all one day on a real tour. Take care, lots of love, and thank you for coming on this talk. Bye bye for now. See you all later.